welcome you to Cop27, meeting for the first time in Sharm el-Sheikh, the first green city. Ladies and gentlemen, your meeting today, participating in this summit, is testimony to your desire to put an end to climate change, which is affecting life on our planet. We will be pooling our efforts today together for implementation. That's the slogan of this conference. Cop27. Let's not forget that we are in many ways the cradle of civilization, Egypt, but also I think we have a brilliant future ahead of us. I'd like to welcome His Excellency Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, President of Egypt.
شكراً للسيدة ميا موتلي رئيسة وزراء دولة بربيدوس. هناك العديد من الطرق للتعبير عن هذه الظاهرة التي
There's several ways of describing this phenomenon which is harming our planet. Some think in terms of initiatives, and others are thinking of implementation to bring about change. And there are, of course, others who are thinking and expressing themselves through art and inspiration.
She nourished them with her love. They were hungry for more. Dry, ill, taking all that she's got. She taught them a lesson they didn't learn. Instead of loving her, they flood her with hurt. They shut their eyes and ears. They sit back and watch as the trees burn, coastlines flood, the land that bears, the seas rise, the ice melts. Now is the time to act. Together, we can heal Mother Earth. Together, for implementation.
ضيوف مصر الكرام، شكراً للمشاركة في الدورة 27 من قمة المناخ.
Thank you for your participation in the opening ceremony of the 27th session of the Conference of Parties here in Sharm el-Sheikh, city of peace, city of the environment, city of hope. We are all convinced that we will be able to deliver the results expected of us. This collective action for implementation. Together for implementation. Thank you.
As the UK's presidency comes to an end, I want to reflect on what we achieved together in Glasgow, and also what has happened since in our presidency year. Last November, the world gathered at Cop26 against a fractured and fractious geopolitics as a once-in-a-century pandemic dragged mercilessly on. And yet, leaders recognized that despite their differences, often profound, cooperation on climate and nature is in our collective self-interest. And thanks to that spirit of cooperation and compromise, we forged together the Glasgow Climate Pact. Collectively, we achieved something historic and something hopeful. With your help, we closed the Paris Rulebook. We made unprecedented progress on coal and on fossil fuel subsidies. We committed to rapidly scale up finance and to double adaptation finance by 2025. We reiterated the urgency of action and support for loss and damage and established serious work on funding arrangements. And we hope that that has paved the way for a formal agenda item and tangible progress here in Egypt. And every party, and I repeat this, every party agreed to revisit and strengthen their 2030 emission reduction targets to align with Paris. So I want to thank the 29 countries which have already updated their NDCs since Glasgow. From Australia to Micronesia, India to Vanuatu, Norway to Gabon. And we also made progress outside the negotiating rooms with commitments from business, from finance, from philanthropy. Friends, thanks to the work that we did together, we achieved our objective, the goal at the heart of the Paris Agreement. We kept 1.5 degrees alive. Now, none of us could have anticipated the year that followed. We have been buffeted by global headwinds that have tested our ability to make progress. Putin's brutal and illegal war in Ukraine has precipitated multiple global crises: energy and food insecurity, inflationary pressures, and spiraling debt. And these crises have compounded existing climate vulnerabilities and the scarring effects of the pandemic. And yet, despite this context, there has been some progress in implementing the commitments that we delivered in Glasgow. Over 90% of the global economy, when the world leaders join us today, they will explain clearly what their countries have achieved during the last year and how they will go further. It is very simply a matter of trust. Without its constituent members delivering on their commitments and agreeing to go further, the entire system falters. I will do everything in my power to support our Egyptian friends, and the UK is here to reach ambitious outcomes across the agenda, including on mitigation, on adaptation, on loss and damage. And we know that we have reached a point where finance makes or breaks the program of work that we had ahead of us. So whilst I would point to some of the progress shown on the $100 billion, I hear the criticisms, and I agree that more must be done by governments and by the multilateral development banks, including on doubling adaptation finance by 2025 and establishing a post-2025 goal. Ultimately, though, I remain hopeful. Look back to where we were before Glasgow. Look back to where we were before Paris. Indeed, as we mark the 30th anniversary, look back to where we were before Rio. With thanks to all of you, the UK's presidency ends as a demonstration.
Most important and biggest global event, as well as electing me to shoulder this huge responsibility, which I will fulfill whilst trusting that Egypt will receive your support in order to achieve together our goals. I confirm to you that Egypt shall spare no effort to achieve these goals, and we will work in order to ensure the best conditions, allowing all participants from all parties, governmental and non-governmental, to contribute to the success of this important event and to reach the results we all aim at. Allow me to also seize this opportunity to express my deepest appreciation to the United Kingdom government, the previous COP presidency, for all the efforts deployed during the presidency, as well as the efforts in order to promote climate action through the excellent performance by the UK presidency team led by my friend Secretary Alok Sharma. It was my pleasure to work with him for almost a year to ensure a smooth presidency handover, building on the political momentum of Glasgow last year, and to build upon the journey in order to reach the objectives we agreed upon and the results we aim at. Ladies and gentlemen, our conference, which starts today, is the 27th session in a 30-year journey we started together in the life of the UNFCCC. A journey that is continuous, that has proven to be relevant and important, and during which we became more cognizant of the threats that are around us, more aware of the science and the risk impacts revealed by science, and more convinced by what we should do in order to overcome these challenges.
To the Egyptian government and the presidency of Cop27 for hosting this crucial conference. We also want to extend our thanks to the people of Sharm el-Sheikh for their warmest welcome and generous hospitality. Thank you. The voice of today's science on climate change could not be sharper, stronger, and more sobering. We are not on track today to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The time for our collective action is now. IPCC reports presented to the world in February and April this year clearly show that we have the technology and the know-how to tackle climate change. But these options are limited by the availability of finance, among others. adaptation options are further limited by global warming levels. With increasing warming, losses and damages will increase, and additional human and natural systems will be pushed to adaptation limits. Therefore, the prerequisite to a successful adaptation is ambitious mitigation to keep global warming within limits, particularly 1.5 degrees Celsius, through immediate and deep cuts in the emissions of greenhouse gases. Progress on the financial flows compatible to the goals of Paris Agreement remains low. Accelerated international financial cooperation is a critical enabler of low emission and just transition. Adaptation gaps, especially in the developing countries, are particularly driven by widening disparities between the cost of adaptation and financing available to adaptation. We can achieve the greatest gains in well-being by prioritizing finance to reduce climate risks for low-income and marginalized communities. Since the Paris Agreement, many countries have put in place climate laws, climate policies, and regulations. But their scope needs to be expanded, their ambition raised, and implemented. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to save our planet and our livelihoods. Ladies and gentlemen and distinguished delegates, this is an opportunity as well as an obligation. The range of options and most of all, the time available to them now will not be there for future leaders and policymakers. Before closing, allow me to reassure you that the scientific community remains ready to work with you and support you in every step of the way in
cooperation on jointly fighting climate change. For over 80 years and last 8 months, Ukraine is fighting another war. Ukraine is facing unprecedented, full-scale war launched by the terroristic state of Russia against Ukraine. This immoral war in the heart of Europe is the war against Ukraine nation, Ukraine people, Ukraine economy, and the very self of Ukrainian identity. This war already having irreversible consequences not only for Ukraine but also for the whole European continent and the world. Loss of life, destroyed cities, destroyed infrastructure, environmental and ecosystem destruction, nuclear aggression threats. These war crime actions of terroristic state of Russia are putting in danger the life itself. Illegal temporary occupation of Ukraine's territories also undermines the reliability of reporting data and all consequent UNFCCC reports. Ukraine continuously raising its concerns over reliability of reporting data under UNFCCC and stress the need to address the robustness of reporting and transparency as a matter of crucial importance. On Cop27,
sorry. Have we got the Secretary General? Do we need to wait for Antonio? Right. Let's wait for Antonio a little bit. You can go ahead. Okay, let's forge on. Thank you, everybody, and welcome to this session on action and solidarity. And I'm going to kick off with giving you my perspective, because this is about all of us taking the concrete steps that will actually help the countries around the world that need it most. And when it comes to tackling climate change, words, blah, 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 without action, without deeds, are absolutely pointless. And our record on deeds so far is not exactly stellar. And I thought you had a brilliant speech earlier on from Mia Motley of Barbados, making the point. Back in Paris, richer nations all signed the paper saying that by 2020 we'd be raising $100 billion of climate finance each year, and there was no ambiguity, no wiggle room in that. And that deadline has come and gone, and yet it's going to be 2023 before we hit that target. So that was one of our very first post-Paris tests, and we've collectively flunked it. But of course, getting there eventually is better than not getting there at all. But if we are late again with the 1.5 or with the rest of the 1.5 degree challenge, then we will have left it far too late. And as anybody who was in that session in Unger will remember, the testimonies of those who are on the front line, the countries that face cataclysmic inundations, the countries that face the hurricanes, they really will not forgive us, and they are looking at what's happening at this COP, and we need to think about them and to take action now to prevent loss and damage on a truly catastrophic scale. We've got to take action on their behalf. So I've got to say to everybody who belongs, like me, to one of the richer and more developed nations, that as the host country for the Cop26, and with Alok on my right, the president. Now you're not just the president designate; you are the president now of COP. If I'm forced to choose between those who speak up and who have spoken up passionately for more support urgently because they need it in the most vulnerable countries in the world, if I'm forced to choose between them and countries like my own, I'm backing the first group. I'm backing the most vulnerable, and I want you to know that we have got your back, and we're going to support you. We're going to support you, because that is the only way to make the change that we need. And I hope that in the course of the next 2 weeks, the contributor nations will tell their negotiators to stick to that objective, and to get to the conclusion that we want. And what I just want to say finally is, if anybody tries to row back on some of the commitments that they have made, or if we feel that things aren't going fast enough, then it's a melancholy fact that I became Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom. I think something like 6 years ago now, a long time. And in that time, 5 or 6 years ago, in that time, I have picked up a lot of mobile phone numbers, which are stored in my iPhone, and I will not hesitate to use that privilege and get on to you and urge you to do more. And if we're gonna make a success of this COP, if we're going to deliver for the countries that need it, if we're going to tackle climate change, then we must raise that finance and understand the position that they're in. Thank you all very much. I'm going to exercise chair's prerogative, I'm afraid, and stick ruthlessly to a 2-minute guillotine for all contributions. I know I've just spoken for much longer than that, but that's that. Again, I'm exercising chair's prerogative in doing that. I hope that meets with everybody's general consent. Is everybody okay for that? Are we okay to stick at 2 minutes each? Okay. Well, I think since we've got fewer people, I tell you what. Here's a compromise. We'll stick at the 2 minutes, but if we have time left over at the end, then those who feel they have more to say can come back. How about that? As a compromise. Can I begin with Co Barrett from the IPCC? But I my friend from Costa Rica, I hear you loud and clear, as I always do. Okay, IPCC first.
Prime Minister Johnson, Secretary General Gutierrez, distinguished world leaders, I'm here today representing the thousands of scientists from across the globe who contribute their expertise to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Our collective efforts deliver the most definitive assessments of the state of the climate so that policymakers, businesses, and individuals can take action based on the best available science. The IPCC makes its decisions by consensus, much like this process. In our case, this is a consensus among governments with scientists. By approving our key findings, every government in this room has already joined the scientific consensus, stating that it is now indisputable human activities have warmed the planet, with impacts from climate change happening at levels we haven't seen in hundreds, and in some cases, thousands of years. Together, we acknowledge that the world has already warmed approximately 1.1 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times, with every decade bringing more record-breaking temperature. Virtually every region of our planet is already being affected by climate change, from the remote polar regions to our highest mountain peaks to the deepest reaches of our ocean. Ice sheets are melting, glaciers are retreating, seas are warming, and the water cycle, the lifeblood of our planet, is changing in profound ways. Places that have never been touched by a human footprint are now being deeply impacted by our carbon footprint. We understand better than ever the causal link between human activity and extreme climate events, many of which are intensifying. For example, where I'm from, in the United States, this year alone, we've experienced 18 climate-fueled disasters, each one costing more than $1 billion. On average, that's one disaster every 3 weeks. Some changes, like rising seas, are already baked into our future, but how high the seas rise and how warm the planet gets are not yet set. The next decade will be critical.
Thank you very much. You've got 18 seconds extra there. I'm afraid I took my eye off the clock, but well done for sneaking that in. Let's go to Gaston Brown of Antigua and Barbuda.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. You spoke earlier about the need for concrete steps, but unfortunately, we are closing out 2021 with ambition that puts us on a pathway that will overshoot the 1.5. And as you're aware, for many small island states, 1.5 is important to stay alive. We're literally fighting to protect and preserve our civilization, and it is important that the international community responds accordingly by reducing their emissions. Reducing emissions to 1.5 or no more than 1.5 is absolutely critical to our survival. And in addition, the issue of funding is very important. And we know that, it needs more than funding, it needs technology as well. But we hope that the 100 billion goal will be achieved and ambitions will be increased. And let me make the point here, Prime Minister, that ambition is the real litmus test. And I'm hoping that during this COP, we will see an increase in ambition so that we can reduce global temperatures below 1.5 degrees. And I also want to address the issue of increased funding for adaptation, because if we're going to overshoot the 1.5, then clearly small island states will require funding in order to adapt to the increase in temperatures. And we can expect, more frequent storms, more powerful storms. In fact, the effects of climate change will increase significantly, hence the need for adaptation funding. And also the issue of loss and damage as well should be addressed going forward. So let me thank you, and I just want to make the point here that Antigua and Barbuda will continue to work in lockstep with the international community to address this existential threat facing the entire planet. Thank you very much, Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Thank you, Gaston, and admirably concise as well, but powerful too. Can we go to the President of the Republic of Korea?
Your Excellency, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Excellencies, I am pleased to join you on this occasion that reaffirms the global community's united action and solidarity in tackling the climate crisis. Today, many citizens around the world are participating online as each and every one of us starts to care more The blue planet will surely make its return that much sooner. The Korean people have begun their dialogue with Mother Earth, hearing the voice of the earth from where they are, and in their own ways, people are taking action and coming together in solidarity. All 243 local governments in Korea, for the first time in the world, made a joint pledge to 2050 carbon neutrality. Religious and civic groups have embarked upon a whole-of-nation movement towards carbon neutrality. Likewise, businesses are voluntarily joining RE100 and scaling up their investment in renewable energy while pushing forward carbon neutrality with great force. Korea officially pledged to enhance its 2030 NDC, a pledge to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 40% compared to 2018 levels. It is indeed a challenging goal that requires accelerated mitigation over a short time horizon, which also incorporates a measure to cut methane emissions by 30%. Korea is joining the global methane pledge. Harnessing our growth experiences, we will cooperate vigorously in helping developing countries transition to a low-carbon economy. We will continue providing climate finance support through the Green Climate Fund and the Global Green Growth Institute, and utilizing the Climate Technology Center and Network, expand cooperation in green technology. We will increase our Green New Deal ODA and remain committed to offering assistance through P4G, public-private partnerships. Climate actions under no circumstances should trigger a rise in greenhouse gas emissions. Korea supports this very spirit of environmental integrity. Also, as a nation that has turned itself from a developing country to a developed one, Korea will actively contribute to forging a balanced consensus between developed countries' call for mitigation and developing countries' appeal for adaptation and finance. With today's promise of action and solidarity, I hope that blue skies, clean air, lush forests, and clear rivers will also come to engage in dialogue with our future generations. Korea will be together every step of the way in our journey towards a better future. Thank you.
So much, Mr. President. And we now go to Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany.
Yeah. Prime Minister, dear Boris Johnson, Excellencies, achieving climate neutrality by mid-century, so ideally by 2050, is our goal. It has been named more than once, and it is urgent that we meet this goal, but we need to invest a lot, and that is putting it mildly. What we need is to achieve a complete transformation of the way we work. We need to also address mobility in a more sustainable manner. That is a major challenge. It is also about the credibility of the industrialized countries, and the delivery plan presented by Canada and Germany goes to show that this objective can be achieved by 2023. And this is what we have to do. Germany will be doing its part by making available another 6 billion euros of taxpayers' money. But it's not enough to get to the 1.5-degree trajectory. So this is why it is important to enhance reductions. Former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon estimates that developing countries need $800 billion in financing per year. There are estimates that go even beyond that. Part and parcel of this is going to come from taxpayers' money. But we won't be able to achieve this objective on our own. And we need to be aware of that. We need to work with the assistance of the multilateral development banks. Increasing the climate finance of the World Bank is an important step, but much more can be done. Once we know the NDCs of each and every country, hopefully they will set us on the trajectory towards 1.5 degrees Celsius. Then we will have to clear about the energy plan each and every country plans to initiate. And then we will have to draft the programs of the development banks accordingly. Even more important is mobilizing private finance and also putting a price on CO2. Once CO2 has been given a price, the capital will know where best to invest. This is why I believe it to be so important that we continue to talk about this approach and also take the necessary decisions. The European Union has already such a pricing system for the industrialized sectors. Action and solidarity go hand in hand, but action will only be possible if we all show solidarity. And a final word. I've listened carefully to the development countries appeal that money is spent in a way that 50% goes into adaptation. I think we should heed that call by the developing countries because the acute impact of climate change is already visible. Thank you, Prime Minister.
And a very good point also about the carbon pricing. Could we go now to His Excellency the President of Switzerland, Guy Parmelin? Where is he?
Je n'entends pas. Excusez-moi, l'interprète n'entend pas. Sorry, the interpreter cannot hear. It seems to be on the wrong channel.
Okay. It's okay. Monsieur le Premier ministre, Excellences, chers collègues.
Mr. Prime Minister, dear colleagues, esteemed colleagues, as this event has stated, action and solidarity for this decade are crucial to reach the goals defined by the Paris Agreement. I've been invited to share Switzerland's aims and objectives, and allow me to highlight 4 points. First of all, with the fragile mountain ecosystems where temperatures increase twice faster than the world average, Switzerland is facing massive adaptation challenges. We've realized that a national strategy for adaptation is crucial to develop a successful adaptation strategy. That's why Switzerland submitted its communication for 2020 defining our national adaptation strategy and our 5-year action plan for each sector. First key aspect is that preparation and communication of plans, adaptation plans in particular, is a key tool in order to prepare globally for climate change. Anchoring adaptation within the Paris Agreement goals was crucial. Now we have to deliver on this objective and not spend many more years still negotiating. That's the second key lesson. However, all countries don't necessarily have the resources to implement such plans. That's why more than 50% of public bilateral funding from Switzerland on climate is dedicated to adaptation measures abroad so that we can support countries who need our help the most. And I'm also delighted to announce that there will be $11 million contribution to the adaptation fund as part of bilateral agreements under the 6.2 point of the Paris Agreement, and a contribution of $9 million to the least developed countries. Third lesson, all countries who can should support those who need help with their adaptation program. Fourth point, mitigation is the best form of adaptation, and Cop26 ought to call countries who haven't done so yet to submit their national contribution so that we can respect this 1.2 objective.
President Parmelin, can I now go to the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi?
Excellencies, for the opportunity to present my views on this very important topic of adaptation. My friend Boris, thank you. Adaptation has not received the kind of importance in global climate debate that mitigation has. This is an injustice to those developing nations that are more impacted by climate change. Just like in India, climate is a big challenge for the agricultural sector of most developing countries. There are changes in the cropping pattern, untimely rains and floods, or crop is being destroyed by regular typhoons. From sources of drinking water to affordable housing, all need to be made resilient against climate change. Excellencies, I have three views in this regard. First, we will need to make adaptation the key component of our development policies and projects. In India, our various projects like Tap Water for All, Clean India Mission, and Clean Cooking Fuel for All have not only provided adaptation benefits to our citizens in need, but they have also improved their quality of life. Second, many traditional communities possess the knowledge to live in harmony with nature. Such traditional practices must get appropriate attention in our adaptation policies. And to ensure that this knowledge is passed on to our younger generation also, we must include it as part of the school syllabus. Preservation of lifestyles as per local conditions can also be an important pillar of adaptation. Third, even if the methods of adaptation are local, the support provided to vulnerable countries must be global. It is keeping in mind the need for global support for local adaptation that India took the initiative of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. I request all countries to be part of this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Narendra. Thank you, Prime Minister Modi. Let's go now to Joe Biden, President of the United States of America.
Well, thank you very much. Get this off. Didn't expect to be called at this moment. That's okay. No, happy to. And my fellow leaders, we're all here gathered in Glasgow because I think this is a critical decade. It's not just where we are in 2050, but this decade is going to determine whether we meet our goals, in my view. And when future historians look back on the 2020s, in my view, I think they'll find that that we let this final chance to stem the crisis slip through our fingers because we did too little or failed to act, or are they going to say that in the 2020s we stepped up and we saw that we took the kind of actions that to unite the world and do what's necessary, the larger countries, to meet our broader obligations beyond our own countries. Action and solidarity, that's what's required. We all know it. And I apologize if I'm repeating some of what you've already said. The United States, if I have anything to do, we'll do our part. As I said earlier today, we've set ambitious goals of reducing U.S. greenhouse gases emissions by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by 2030. That's a goal in line with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But the math only works if every country does its part, and those countries that don't have the wherewithal get the kind of help they need. Every major economy needs to enhance its Paris targets, in my view, to a level that will keep our goal within reach, and then continue to raise our standards. Developing economies need to take meaningful mitigation and adaptation actions as well, but they're going to need help. Our success, in my view, hinges on our collective commitment to ramping up our momentum and strengthening our climate ambition by advancing concrete actions during this decade to keep the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal within our reach and be realistic. Developed and developing economies, so many of which are the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, have to stand together and hold each other accountable. The United States recognizes that we will meet our duty to support developing countries taking these actions because they're going to need our help. At the UN General Assembly, I announced our intention to work with our Congress to quadruple our climate financing by 2024, including support for adaptation. As I said earlier, we'll also make our first ever contributions to the Adaptation Fund. And I guess I shouldn't apologize, but I do apologize for the fact the United States in the last administration pulled out of the Paris Accords and put us sort of behind the eight ball a little bit. The first thing I did when elected, and I see my friend nodding his head over there because we talked about this before while I was running. But today I'm announcing also the Presidential Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience. And although I try to very hard to resist acronyms, they came up with that because so they could say prepare. That's what we're calling it. But prepare will serve as a comprehensive framework to mobilize U.S. government resources and expertise in support of climate adaptation efforts for more than 500 million people worldwide. We're going to invest in creating an early warning system and expanding clean energy, and build a water-smart infrastructure for drought, supporting sustainable forestry and agriculture, and helping nature to work to reduce the climate change drivers and impacts, and protecting critical infrastructure, enhancing resilience of vulnerable nations in the face of a wide range of climate impacts. If we had more time, I'd go into detail of what are the things we think we can do to do those things. But, you know, we're also launching a net zero world initiative to help share the technical expertise of the United States, world-class national laboratories, and the speed and support the transition of for developing countries to energy systems that are affordable and reliable and clean. And here's what we should all remember, in my view. Presumptuous of me to say this, what we should all remember, but I think we should. We have to make sure that our people understand making these investments in our clean energy future isn't just a need to fight climate change. As I said a moment ago, and I apologize for repeating myself when I spoke to the whole assembly, is that it's an enormous opportunity to create good-paying jobs for our own workers today, and to spur long-term economic growth that's going to improve the quality of life for all people. I think that really is within our power to do it if we make the commitment. These are investments that we can't afford to not make. And we all have to step up, as to use the vernacular, English vernacular, step up to the plate and do our piece. I really mean it. And, you know, these investments, as I said, are ones that I think we can meet. Our meeting here in Glasgow isn't the end of the journey, as we all know, and I know we all know this, and you know it as well or better than I do, many of you. It's really just you know, a starting line to begin to really take, for the first time, really decisive action. And one that's going to determine whether or not we're going to be able to meet the challenge of climate change and deliver on the promise of a safer, more prosperous future for all our people. I think we can do this. My mother, God love her, used to have an expression, say, out of everything bad, something good will come if you look hard enough for it. Well, I know in the United States, just because of the leadership of people behind me, like former Secretary Kerry and Senator Kerry and a lot of you as well, that that the American people 4 or 5 years ago weren't at all sure about climate change, whether it was real. Well, they have, as they say in southern parts of my state, seen the Lord. They've seen what's happened back home, the incredible changes that are taking place. And they're now finally realizing the sense of urgency that you all are. And so, look, as I said, we have the tools, I think we have the know-how, and we have the resources, but we have to make some choices. And I apologize that gonna have to step away. One of the choices I'm gonna make is I'm gonna better the person sitting in this seat in a moment and ask Secretary Kerry, a special presidential envoy on climate change, a longtime friend and a genuine expert on this issue. He's done an incredible job this year. But let me conclude by saying, I know I've gone over my time, is that I really, honest to God, think we have an opportunity, if we seize it, an opportunity that I think the world is ready to embrace. But I want to emphasize again, I think those of us who have deforested a long time ago, those of us who have taken actions a long time ago that caused the problems we have, we have to be ready to step up for everyone from Tanzania to Fiji to make sure that they have the wherewithal. And that's the next, I have to acknowledge to you, that's the next big case that I'm going to have to make at home. They now know there is a climate change and they're ready to step up. But we got to make sure they know that the United States has an obligation to also step up at financing other countries that have not had the opportunity to do as much damage as we have and have an opportunity to get much better. So anyway, thank you very much. And thank you for having me, old buddy. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Well,
Merci. Merci, Joe. Si vous me regardez d'un air impatient et vous vous demandez pourquoi j'ai laissé le président des États-Unis parler plus longtemps que d'habitude, eh bien, je dirais d'abord que Joe n'était pas dans la salle lorsque j'ai donné cette contrainte, mais également parce que vous comprenez l'importance du rôle des États-Unis dans la prise d'action pour la lutte contre le changement climatique. Voilà, donc autorisez-moi de faire une exception dans ce cas. Nous passons maintenant au représentant de Madagascar, André Rajoelina.
Messieurs les chefs d'État, chefs de délégation, les décideurs du monde sont réunis ici à Glasgow aujourd'hui pour œuvrer à préserver l'avenir de l'humanité tout entière.
Yes, I think it is. Excellency, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of states, delegation states, the leaders of the world are gathered here in Glasgow to help preserve the future of mankind. Climate change is one of the main challenges that our era has to face. We have to work together and mobilize in order to preserve our planet and our environment. Today, I wanted to talk in particular about our forests. They are on switching sands and they have been destroyed and are turned into deserts, and therefore we have to act quickly. Madagascar represents a big part of the world biodiversity, and it contributes to the fight against climate change by capturing most of the greenhouse gases in the world. It also has endemic species of fauna and flora which is endangered. Forests are the lungs of our planet. The World Forest Heritage is in Latin America and Africa, and yet, in particular, Africa and Madagascar are under fast deforestation. 3 million hectares of forest disappear each year. In order to have heating food and transformation for cooking fuel. 80% of households use wood in order to cook their foods, and you need 100 kilos of wood to do so. So each family destroys 1 hectare of forestry each year. So how can we stop this disaster? We would suggest transition through funding of clean energies that would replace heating wood. So Madagascar pleads for the use of bioethanol and gas everywhere in Africa. By way of example, in order to equip 4 million households in Madagascar, we need funding up to $100 million, which our own populations cannot sustain. Madagascar, like the rest of Africa, can be the showcase for climate change resilience. But we need funding and technical support in order to enhance our ambitions in terms of adaptation. We need to act today, not tomorrow, nor by waiting until 2030. Thank you.
Mette Frederiksen of Denmark.
Thank you so much also for hosting this important meeting, and you asked us to be very short, so I'll just give you 3 messages from Denmark. First of all, I think we need to raise ambitions to keep 1.5 degrees within reach. We all need to put action behind our words and monitor that we actually deliver. And on that note, Denmark will reduce emissions by 70% in 2030. Secondly, we have to mobilize more climate finance. A lot of colleagues have already put that on the agenda. And we have to admit that collectively we are not delivering what we are supposed to deliver. And therefore, Denmark aims to mobilize at least 1% of the $100 billion target. And that means that we will give more than what we are supposed to give, but as long as we not collectively are lifting our responsibility, then we have to, I think, push each other. And then thirdly, we need to support developing countries adapt to climate change. It is simply not possible for all to fulfill the global ambitions if we are not able to help each other and if we don't take the responsibility to do that. Dear colleagues, we have all the words already. We have the evidence from the IPCC report. We know what we are facing. We have the technologies. We now need to take the necessary solutions, and we have to show the world, and especially our kids and the young people, that we are able to lift the responsibility that we are carrying on our shoulders. And the ambition with 1.5 degrees is the most important for all of us. So please, everyone, let's use this meeting to show that we are able to respond and to fulfill what we have already agreed on. Thank you.
And congratulations to Mette on being the most beautifully succinct so far. Thank you very much. Let's go now to the President of Tanzania, Samia Suluhu Hassan.
Thank you, Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Excellencies, for sure, we know what is needed, and we know what works. Our solidarity and commitment as leaders will be measured not by a set of high ambitions we make today, but our actions across all the pillars of the Paris Agreement: mitigation, adaptation, and finance, commensurate with the scale of the challenges. Climate change is a global issue. Its remedy must be global too. We therefore call upon development countries who are the major emitters to scale up their actions on mitigation by providing predictable and adequate funding to enable us, the low-income countries, achieve our ambitious national determined contribution goals sustainably. Adequate funding, particularly in terms of grants, will be key for our adaptation strategies. My country, Tanzania, and most of the low-income countries have developed ambitious NDCs with clear mitigation initiatives. Our mitigation goals have been set across all key sectors. However, we can't achieve them without adequate financial support and technical know-how transferred to our places to build our capacities. Excellencies, unless we act now, And in solidarity, the goal to attain a 1.5 degrees Celsius may soon be elusive and far-fetched. Definitions, markets, rights, technologies, and who is entitled to what should not take away our main focus, our focus of common but differentiated responsibilities for a shared vision of sustainable growth. Together, we can save our planet. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam President. And can I now go to the Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison?
Well, thank you, Boris, and thank you for focusing on this issue of adaptation. And can I also acknowledge the Cop27 President and Chair of the Pacific Island Forum, Prime Minister Bainimarama, who's been a champion on this issue as well. Australia, we're very used to living in a very harsh climate, and as a result, we're systematically always planning for the risks. This year, we established our National Recovery and Resilience Agency. We launched our Australian Climate Service, which is a $200 million investment to ensure we have the best and robust information to evaluate risks across our financial system, physical infrastructure, health system and the natural environment. We've invested $600 million to ensure Australian communities are better prepared for disasters. A few years ago, we established the National Drought Fund, some $5 billion to improve our resilience against droughts, of which Australia is very familiar with, upgrading building standards and infrastructure standards to deal with flood, fire and cyclones, risks which happen in Australia quite regularly. Last week, we delivered our first adaptation communication to the UNFCCC, and we are a proud signatory of the Kanakalua and Boe declarations, and that Kanakalua declaration resolved at Tuvalu is the beginning point of where Australia has now committed to net zero emissions by 2050. We've joined the COP presidency call for action on adaptation and resilience and the Adaptation Action Coalition. And that's why we've also established a $2 billion infrastructure financing facility for the Pacific, and why we're supporting a Pacific Meteorological Services through our Climate and Ocean Support Program. Historically, 70% of our bilateral and regional climate finance has supported adaptation and resilience across the Indo-Pacific. And at this COP, we have doubled our commitment to $2 billion through to 2025 on supporting climate adaptation. Australia will be doing that directly with our partners, and in particular with the Pacific Island nations. We have to ensure that our climate finance gets to the people who need it and doesn't get clogged up with bureaucracy and red tape, and that's why Australia does its climate financing directly with our development partners.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Scott. Let's go to my friend Charles Michel, the President of the Council of the European Union.
Merci beaucoup, Boris. Tu as parfaitement planté le décor dans ton discours. Tu t'es référé à James Bond. Je vais être moins spectaculaire, je me réfère à ma grand-mère. Et quand j'étais enfant, ma grand-mère me disait toujours « Ne remets pas à demain ce qu'il faut faire aujourd'hui ». C'est exactement le sentiment qui doit nous animer aujourd'hui. Et les messages donnés tracent la direction. Très brièvement, quelques points. 1, bien sûr, le financement. Nous devons mobiliser les moyens publics. L'Union européenne le fait. 37% du budget européen, plus le fonds de relance, seront dédicacés à l'action climatique. 2, l'argent privé et le secteur privé. On doit travailler ensemble pour encourager le secteur privé, développer des standards communs afin qu'on canalise ces montants gigantesques, tu les as évoqués aussi dans ton discours d'introduction, pour avoir des résultats.
Third element, carbon pricing. The EU put it in place and it has an impact. We must coordinate these actions. It's important because it will bring a level playing field at a global level. We must change the prosperity, economic and social model for the world. And then the third element I wanted to mention is coherence, consistency. So our policies must also include the dimension of the fight against climate change. We are currently talking about exported deforestation. If we use mechanisms that pass on the responsibility elsewhere, well, in fact, we haven't moved forward on our agenda. And the president of Barbados talked about passion earlier. She talked about passion about the $100 billion, and I agree, we have to do and there has to be, in order to respect the 2 minutes, I'll stop there, but we have, it's about trust. Now we move on to Jamaica, the Prime Minister of Jamaica.
Thank you, Prime Minister Johnson. Excellencies, the realities of climate vulnerable countries such as Jamaica are well known. You will understand our anxiety that climate impact at more than 1.5 degrees is a threat to our very existence. Even at 1 degree, we are already losing our beaches, reefs, and land infrastructure from rising and warming seas. Yearly, we brace ourselves for natural disasters and the consequential fiscal pressures. Despite these challenges, Jamaica has proactively seized opportunities to strengthen our resilience and reduce our vulnerabilities. However, the quality of climate finance must urgently be improved if we are to survive the threat of climate change. This means boosting grant funding from its current levels and allocating at least half of concessional climate finance to support adaptation and resilience objectives. The impact of climate change is frighteningly real for small island developing states. We have neither the technology nor the resources to adapt to the extent required, and moreover, there are limits to adaptation. This now takes us into the realm of loss and damage. Responding to loss and damage is a necessary part of the action we must take here at COP26. Now, immediately following this COP, Jamaica intends to submit its adaptation communication, reflecting our progress, but highlighting the support we need, including for loss and damage. We are also innovating by collaborating with the GCF and the UK FCDO to pilot a predictive tool, the first of its kind, to enable climate analytics to inform public and private sector infrastructure investments and to efficiently allocate financial resources. This will be made available regionally and scaled and replicated. We have also programmed the preparation of a national adaptation plan, which will, among other things, streamline adaptation priorities for funding, the development of a complementary financing plan and investment strategy for adaptation, the implementation of a long-term strategy for low carbon and climate resilient development, along with our updated NDC. Colleagues, friends, the young people of the world are depending on us to take action now. That has to start right here with us all right now.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Let's go to the President of Costa Rica, Carlos Alvarado Quezada.
Thank you, Boris. Dear colleagues, true story, 2 days ago. Daddy, don't go to Glasgow. I'm going to miss you. So I start persuading my kid, 8-year-old Gabriel, why it was critical to be here. What is climate change? Then he asked. So I started explaining in a subtle way what's climate change. But then I started to sense the fear on my 8-year-old child. Not because I was leaving, because of what I was telling him. When is that going to happen, Daddy? That's going to happen far away from here, right? And I did not answer those questions. I said I have to go because we need to fix this. So, Excellencies, colleagues, whatever your country and you are bringing to Glasgow, please do instruct your teams to put more on the table, because it's not enough. And our job is to fix this at whatever cost. And our job is not to fail. We cannot fail. The larger your economy is, the larger your footprint is, the largest your responsibility is. Ironically, developing countries have the largest nature-based solutions, and we are the ones that use less fossil fuels. Today, absents are more present than ever because we need everybody on board. Also, I want to take the occasion to say that let's put aside any military or commercial antagonism. Does it make any sense in a world that's dying to wage war militarily or commercially? War for what? For a dying planet? Why invest in military if it's fossil fuels that are putting at risk our people, our children? And I'm not talking to any crowd. It is you people, we that can change this. Those who are in the room. Costa Rica is doing its part. That's why we all need to do our part. And let's lead, as my sister Mia said earlier, let's lead. But let's lead with an army of ideas, of courage, and of peace. That's what's required. So thank you, Boris, for my 3 minutes.
You're entitled to them. They were perfect. Thank you, Carlos. Let's go to Mario, Prime Minister of Italy.
Thank you, Boris. Dear colleagues, scientists have warned us once again about what's at stake. We must commit to ambitious reductions of our emissions starting from this decade to prevent the impact of climate change from becoming catastrophic. This pledge was at the heart of the declaration of the G20 leaders in Rome, and now the G20 countries must now uphold it and implement it. As we plan our next steps, we must set ourselves concrete goals, and this path requires creativity, ambition, and sound economic planning. I'm proud of the efforts made by Italy and by the European Union through the Next Generation EU program. Member states have decided to turn the pandemic into an opportunity. We have embarked on an ambitious set of reforms and investment. We intend to speed up the environmental transition in our economies and make growth more equitable and sustainable. Technological change must be at the heart of this transition to make possible tomorrow what looks impossible today. And we need a truly global effort, matching the success in developing vaccines against COVID-19. We must speed up innovation in the field of renewable energy. In particular, we must accelerate the development of new batteries and seek to go beyond the existing lithium technologies. In the long run, we must be aware, however, that renewable energies may have limits. The European Commission tells us that they may not be enough to reach the ambitious targets we have set ourselves for 2030 and 2050. So we have to start developing alternatives across the board now, because they will come to full fruition only in some years. Meanwhile, we need to invest in innovative technology for carbon capture. Today, we understood one thing. Whether it's new technologies or infrastructure programs for adaptation, money may not be a constraint any longer if we bring in the private sector. As I hinted this morning, I really like to instruct all the multilateral development banks and the World Bank to get serious about co-sharing risks with the private sector. And I suggest that a task force is set up here at this COP26 to lay out a blueprint to this extent. Before I leave the floor to Ms. Nisreen El-Sain, I want to repeat that it's crucial that we listen to the voice of our youth. At the pre-COP summit in Milan, young activists drafted proposals and picked priorities on crucial issues such as how to foster a sustainable recovery. And Nisreen has been one of the most active young representatives there. We've heard your voice, Nisreen, loud and clear. Now we must move forward together and starting with a successful COP26 here in Glasgow. Thanks, Boris.
Thank you, Mario. Over to you, Nisreen.
Yes. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, with all titles respected and preserved. My name is Nisreen El-Sain. I'm from Sudan, but today, and to make it easier to Mr. Prime Minister of Italy, my name is 47% of the world population. So anytime you meet me, don't say Nisreen, just say 47% and I will understand. This 47% is only the people who are aged between 15 and 29. We are not yet talking about the people 30 to 35. We are not also talking about children, which is by far more than this number. So we are basically represent more than the half of the population of the planet. So it's not a gift or it's not a privilege to listen to us. Actually, it's an obligation because we represent most of the population of the world. After saying this, I feel very heavy speaking to you today. Not because of public speaking issues, I don't have these issues, but because I don't see our legitimate Prime Minister, Dr. Abdullah Hamdok, and his cabinet among you today because of what's happening in my country, Sudan. Which actually reminds me that all of the journeys and the fights for justice are very much similar. We have very similar features in all of the fights that we are actually pursuing in our journey. Every time we have people doing their best, all of the possible and a little bit of the impossible to actually make things work. But unfortunately, political will always hinder these efforts. Young people in all cases are giving their time, efforts, ideas, and even money to preserve their rights to freedom, peace, and justice, and also, of course, clean and healthy environment. The right to have a future, the right to even work in their election campaigns to become prime ministers or presidents of their countries, to become you, basically, one day, if we have this future. Young people around the world, but specifically in Africa, are surrounded by enormous challenges, all of them somehow related to the absence of political will. Coup. Coup normally is a word that describes a violent takeover of power, but believe it or not, I discovered that there is a very positive meaning of coup, and allow me to actually quote the Oxford Dictionary. I'm not a native English speaker, and that's why I'm quoting. Coup means an instance and successfully achieving something difficult. This is the kind of coups we want and we need. So can we have a coup, this COP? In a positive way, of course.
Let's put the U into COP.
Yes. Finally, I have two things. I'm not worried about both the civil movement to Sudan nor the climate movement around the world. I have zero doubts that both journeys will succeed and will come to a very good final. But I'm actually worried about you. You have to choose the right side of the battle. And secondly, I need a selfie with all of you. But please make me proud of these selfies. Otherwise, I will just delete it.
Very good. Very good. That is a challenge. Okay, thank you, Nisreen. And could we go now to His Excellency President Sisi of Egypt?
Thank you, Mr. President. دولة السيد بوريس جونسون رئيس وزراء المملكة المتحدة، أصحاب الفخامة، يسرني أن أواصل معكم حديثنا الممتد اليوم في هذه الحلقة النقاشية المهمة، والتي أود التركيز فيها على موضوع تمويل المناخ خاصة ذلك الموجه إلى التكيف مع الآثار السلبية لتغير المناخ، وهو كما تعلمون جانب يمثل أولوية ملحة لمصر وإفريقيا وللدول النامية على وجه العموم، ولا تستطيع دولنا رفع طموحها المناخي بدونه. وأرغب هنا في الحديث حول نقطتين. الأولى، تبذل مصر جهودا كبيرة لتعزيز قدرتها على التكيف مع الآثار السلبية لتغير المناخ، حيث جاء التكيف كأحد الأهداف الرئيسية الخمسة بالاستراتيجية المصرية.
I'm so sorry. I don't think we've got the translation. Unless is anybody... I didn't want to pretend any longer to be able to follow it. Oh, you've got it on Channel Zero. Sorry, forgive me. Sorry.
It's okay.
Forgive me.
Start from the beginning.
I think a number of colleagues probably weren't able to follow. I'm so sorry.
أصحاب الفخامة، يسرني أن أواصل معكم حديثنا الممتد اليوم في هذه الحلقة النقاشية المهمة، والتي أود التركيز فيها على موضوع تمويل المناخ، خاصة ذلك الموجه إلى التكيف مع الآثار السلبية لتغير المناخ، وهو كما تعلمون جانب يمثل أولوية ملحة لمصر وإفريقيا وللدول النامية على وجه العموم، ولا تستطيع دولنا رفع طموحها المناخي بدونه.
We cannot start this without. First, Egypt is doing its best to adaptation. Egypt is doing everything. We're doing everything we can for adaptation. We believe that adaptation is a key element in climate in tackling climate change. Egypt is now starting a number of projects to help climate change and also to help the lives of the new generations. And for the last years, we have been trying very hard, and we still feel like there's a big gap, especially relating to climate finance. We are committed to do our role, especially after what happened after the aftermath coronavirus costs. We urge the developed countries to do their role helping other developing countries. We are looking forward to come out with a great outcomes of this Cop26. I think you agree with me, it's time now to initiate the international goal for adaptation that includes financing, especially adaptation for developing countries, and stop the investment in carbon markets. And we start doing this in the following coming days. And thank you very much. شكرا لفخامة الرئيس السيسي.
Dans la lutte climatique, on doit être ferme et résolu. On doit saisir cette occasion pour être encore plus ambitieux et agir de manière concrète. Et c'est exactement ce que le Canada est venu faire ici. Nous avons déjà
That's exactly what Canada's come to do here today. We need to tackle the cost of our emissions. We need to protect our oceans and our lands, and it's only a start. We must stick to the 1.5-degree objective, and to do so we need to tackle pollution caused by fossil fuels.
And here are the numbers that back that up. 2030, that's the year by which we'll phase out coal-fired electricity in Canada. 0, the amount of thermal coal Canada will export under our new commitment to a ban. $1 billion what we'll provide from our climate financing to help developing countries move away from coal as well. In fact, on climate finance, Canada has doubled our overall commitment. In partnership with Germany and others, we've also created the delivery plan that sets when and how developed countries will fulfill their commitment to the $100 billion goal. And the final number, the 1st of November, 2021. My friends, today, Canada moves to cap oil and gas sector emissions and ensure they decline at a pace and scale needed to achieve net zero by 2050. We are the first major oil and gas producing nation to do this. And of course, we've made a promise to the workers in the sector that will be there for them and their families into this brighter future. That's our commitment. And we urge other major oil and gas producing nations to join us. Because words aren't enough to secure strong economies for citizens and a bright future for our kids. So we're delivering a real plan with real, ambitious climate action for our citizens and for our shared future. Merci, Boris.
Great stuff, Justin. I think that's new news, if I get you correct. Well, that's terrific. Can we go now to Frank Bainimarama of Fiji, Prime Minister of Fiji?
Thank you, sir. Excellencies, Mbula Minak, and good afternoon. Excellencies, some of you may remember from Cop23 in Bonn, the Fijian double-hulled sailing canoe, known as the Ndrua, that symbolized our message of solidarity, that we are all in the same canoe when it comes to climate change. As I speak, Your Excellencies, our global canoe is headed for storms that will sink us while seawater pours aboard through massive gaps in ambition, gaps in climate finance, and gaps in emissions reduction commitments. It brings to mind, Your Excellencies, an ancient adage, one I've seen added to Fiji's call to action, Tuna inima, lubu nawanga, which means, quite literally, the boat sinks despite the presence of the bailers. Island nations like Fiji have teaspoons with which to bail water. The G20 nations have buckets. Yet too many are willfully ignoring the storms on the horizon and the holes in our canoe. They must cut emissions now to set our canoe towards the calm of carbon neutral seas, and they need to start bailing now by meeting their climate finance pledges before our canoe sinks to the seabed. While we welcome the new climate finance delivery plan on meeting the US $100 billion goal by 2023, we do so knowing that nations have fallen billions short of previous pledges. And despite being the most climate vulnerable nations in the world, small island developing states have accessed a mere 2% of the available finance, which has mostly been through loans, forcing us to pay high interest rates to address climate-driven impacts we did not cause. Wealthy nations do more than pledge finance. They must make it affordable and accessible, and they must actually ensure that it reaches the communities it's meant to aid for mitigation, but mainly for adaptation purposes. And we thank the Australian government for committing itself to assistance in the Pacific community. And by 2025, much higher levels of commitment will be required. $750 billion annually in climate finance, 10% of which is dedicated to small island development states, as well as a dedicated mechanism for the losses and damages we have already sustained. Wealthy nations spend trillions on defense partnerships and on weapons that can level entire communities. Surely we can spend billions to adopt them. How do we ensure that this is not yet another empty ask? We can start by meeting the 2023 commitment. Another way would be to finalize Article 6, price carbon, and ensure emitters pay to adapt the communities they are devastating. This COP is where we will choose to stay with 1.5 or lose it forever. And it is where we decide whether we are with the young and future children of the world or we are against them. To all leaders here, the message of the Pacific is simple. Our canoe is sinking. Pick up your buckets and start bailing now, before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Could we now go to Sheikh Hasina of Bangladesh? Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. I thank you, Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Prime Minister Mario Draghi for convening this important event. Despite being a climate vulnerable country, Bangladesh is a global pioneer on adaptation initiatives and resilience. We are planting 30 million saplings this year, and we will continue that, and are going to launch the Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan, named after the father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, to guide the country's development trajectory to a strategic low-carbon pathway. Recently, we submitted an ambitious NDC. We have also drafted our National Adaptation Plan, NAP, with significant enhancement of our adaptation initiatives. As the President of the CBF and the host of the South Asian Office of Global Center on Adaptation, we are promoting locally led adaptation in different countries of the world. But global adaptation actions are not being effective due to lack of finance and political will. To address this, developed countries must fulfill their commitment of annual $100 billion climate finance with 50-50 allocation for adaptation and mitigation. The Paris Agreement must be fulfilled. They also need to support vulnerable countries by transferring green and clean technologies at affordable cost. I thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Sheikh Hasina. Can we go now to the Taoiseach of Ireland, Micheál Martin, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Boris and the Prime Minister, and appreciate the hospitality afforded to us so far. And I just welcome the opportunity today to voice again Ireland's very strong commitment to global action, to deliver on the goals of the Paris Agreement in particular, and to keep global temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees centigrade. There can be no doubt that climate change is real, it's accelerating, and we have to act together to deal with this. And in acting as a global community, climate justice must be at the centre of our efforts. Countries and communities struggling to cope already must have our support. Ireland has decided to direct our international climate finance towards the most vulnerable countries, those who stand to lose most, in particular less developed countries and small island developing states. We've consistently channeled over half of our climate finance through grants to adaptation actions in these countries. At the UN General Assembly, we were proud to launch the Champions Group on Adaptation Finance together with your government, Prime Minister, and the governments of Denmark, Sweden, Netherlands and Finland. And through this group, Ireland will work to enhance the quality. It's not just about allocating finance, it's the quality and accessibility of adaptation finance to ensure that it meets the needs of those who are most impacted by climate change. Ireland will also be increasing its contribution to support the target of achieving 100 billion target, and we will more than double our contribution so that by 2025 we'll be contributing over 200 and 25 million. So that's about 140% increase. That's at least, and that's already factored into our budget figures. Nationally, we're also upping our efforts on mitigation, and this year we have legislated for binding emission reduction targets that will see Ireland become a climate resilient, biodiversity-rich, environmentally sustainable and climate-neutral economy by no later than 2050, and with emissions reductions of 51% by 2030. But targets, as you have said, Prime Minister, alone will not reduce emissions. We recognise the need for solutions commensurate with the scale of the challenge. Our forthcoming first carbon budget programme and annual climate action plans will drive systemic change and support meaningful climate action. In conclusion, colleagues, I think we must have the courage to take action now and collectively to secure a safe and sustainable planet for generations to come. We have a unique opportunity before us to step up our ambition and to turn the tide on climate change. Let the narrative emerging from this conference be one of hope, with a focus on solutions and what we can achieve when we work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Thank you, Michal. Can we go now to President Alberto Fernandez of Argentina?
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. This climate and health crisis has affected all of us. However, it's the countries of low and medium income that are suffering the most impacts, and where the impacts are seen the greatest. We are seeing huge gaps between different populations. The pandemic has deepened and worsened these problems in Latin America and in the Caribbean. We want to achieve a transition to a more sustainable and inclusive model. Argentina has formalized an increase of 2% in the NDC, which has resulted in a commitment of 27% higher than that given in 2016. We've also made progress in other objectives in a legal framework for eradicating illegal deforestation and protect native peoples and to reduce methane production. We've also offered projects to establish hydrogen as a new source of energy and a cultural change in terms of environmental education in our curricula. However, it's essential to remain clear that without sustainable financing, we won't have any sustainable development, and that we won't have any development. Although we have common points, there are many differences between our countries. Development needs genuine financing to make progress in this matter. We need to be capable of offering an efficient instrument that will enable us to offer these drawing rights for sustainable development. In the case of Latin America and the Caribbean, the channeling of these to the regional banks is key to ramp up the technological tools necessary to face this challenge, which is worrying for all of us. We think it's necessary to strengthen environmental multilateralism. The environmental multilateralist organizations have to offer 52% of their loans to environmental actions. We've identified clean energies as public assets, and in the same manner, and so that this can be a just transition, we need multilateral rules that avoid new forms of protectionism. We are promoting this debt for climate change. We need payment mechanisms for ecosystemic services, and we need to, with the same objective, the funds already committed and paid for climate action must be saved. These measures are absolutely essential, but they're not sufficient. And so we would like to build a technical and political committee for climate change with the involvement of developed countries and least developed countries that recognizes the common responsibilities, although differed, and that takes into account the structural and societal differences in our communities. The planet's clock won't stop. Among all of us, we have to generate the conditions to implement the changes necessary. we need to implement climate action now. Thank you.
Fernandez, could we now go to? I've been keeping you back, Mia, because you spoke so brilliantly earlier on. But again, let's hear from Mia Motley of Barbados.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Johnson, and let me thank you for inviting me, and Prime Minister Draghi of Italy as well. Thank you for your role in coordinating this. Earlier, I spoke about the absolute need for us to reach 1.5, but I'm also a woman of practical affairs. And if we don't reach that 1.5, we need to know how we are going to adapt, because the world has disappointed us before. We believe that we are already at 1.2, as we know, and we are already seeing the signs of it. The third most active hurricane season on record is this year, the fourth most costly in terms of damage. And indeed, this is the 7th straight year that we've had hurricanes coming outside of the normal season. We have therefore to adapt. And to adapt means that we need to look and see how it can be done, within what time frame, and how easier. Barbados has set itself by 2030 being able to have its electricity provided almost exclusively by renewable energy and transforming our transport sector. And that soon thereafter, 2035, to deal with the remaining aspects that will get us as close to net zero as possible. But we're also conscious that as small island developing states continue to be affected by highly indebted profiles, not because of profligacy and corruption, but let us go back to the other adaptations that we've had to do over the last 30 years. We've had to adapt our World Trade Organization that removed from us the policy matrix of non-tariff barriers and tariffs, which led to the destruction of our productive sectors in manufacturing and agriculture. We've had to adapt to a 9/11 post 9/11 world with Resolution 1393 and all of the other things that had to be put in place, which led to increased expenditure. We've had now to adapt to a pandemic, and tourism and travel dependent countries declined by almost, in our case, 17% last year, reversing us in nominal terms by a decade and in real terms by almost 3 decades. We are asked now to adapt to our plus 1.5 world. We cannot do it without the assistance of the rest of the global community. We need a 50-50 split on adaptation. We need, as I said, ideally for us to put aside 500 billion of SDRs for 20 years. If we can't get that, we need to go with the IMF's Resilience and Sustainability Trust as a matter of urgency, with vulnerability as a criteria and not per capita income, which excludes all of us and has excluded all of us from an early start on adaptation because we cannot get access to the funds. It is ludicrous that Barbados cannot borrow from the World Bank for climate and only just got exceptional access for the pandemic. We need also to use the Green Climate Fund with more streamlined approaches, looking at guarantees, and private equity with first losses. We need also to copy. Barbados is now the largest issue of natural disaster clauses in our bonds, and we need to make sure that we can provide certainty in the event of a climatic event for both borrower and lender by creating that fiscal space immediately rather than hoping that it will happen. We also need to ensure that we can literally deal with the issue of insurance, because unless businesses can access insurance and can afford insurance, they will not access capital for normal development and expansion. These are real issues that our businesses and our households face, and we hope that this world will not be distracted by geopolitics at the very time when we need more than ever to act with singular purpose. The last comment I'll make, our solutions must be home-driven and not cookie-cutter. And to that extent, Barbados has come up with its own Roof to Reefs program, recognizing that it is not only access to concessional funding that will make the difference, but we have also to fight the battle of creating sufficient fiscal space to access that funding. That is why my brother Andrew from Jamaica would have made the point about grants, but we believe these market measures that I've referred to in here can also help unlock other funds that will make the difference. 12 years is not sufficient time to change our systems and to move from water to water supplementing, to literally fighting sargassum weed, to literally fighting those other things that affect us like storms and floods. We need the support now, not next year nor the next decade. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Mia. Let's go to the Prime Minister of Rwanda, Edouard Nigarente.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister Boris. I'm pleased to join you today to discuss the urgent need to deliver on the goal of the Paris Agreement and keep 1.5 degrees in reach. Rwanda, like other developing countries, is facing the severe impact on climate change. Adaptation is especially critical for countries that are both vulnerable to climate change and bearing the brunt of the effect of global warming. Rwanda is investing in adaptation using domestic funding or co-financing. However, no developing nation will be able to meet its goals without external financing. We all know that to secure global net zero, significant private and public sector finance must quickly be made available. At this Cop26, let us mobilize the investment needed for vulnerable countries to protect and restore ecosystems, build defenses, warning systems, and resilient infrastructure, and protect agriculture to avoid the loss of homes, livelihood, and even lives. Once again, I thank our hosts and summit organizers and look forward to working together for success of COP26 and beyond. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister. Can we go now to the plurinational state of Bolivia, President Luis Arce?
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. At the moment, we are experiencing a climate crisis in the world which is affecting all human beings on Mother Earth. It's going to provoke the imminent collapse of humankind and of Mother Earth. Since 2010, Bolivia has proposed that the only solution to the climate crisis is through the fair and equal distribution of the atmospheric space and of these responsibilities, although different. As the UNFCCC establishes on climate change, as we have mentioned in the latest scientific reports and the reports from the Convention Secretariat, in order to mitigate the temperatures within the framework of the Paris Agreement, we need to reduce emissions significantly. It's the developed countries that have to take leadership to defend humankind and Mother Earth. It's a lie to say that the commitments for zero emissions before 2050 are a very ambitious target facing climate change, as what this means for developed countries is to avoid their historic responsibilities, dress up their inaction, their climate inaction, and continue to fill this atmospheric space for developing countries. In COP26, for this to be successful, it has to conclude with a decision that will lead to a path for the real and immediate reduction for developed countries with a maximum limit of 2030. In turn, the developing countries will have to gradually reduce our emissions based on the provisions from the developed countries, the provisions of financing, transfer of technology, and capacity building. Bolivia is contributing to the global climate solutions geared towards the horizon of buen vivir, living well in harmony with Mother Nature. We haven't stayed put with our arms crossed, and we are contributing with our national efforts, with actions to avoid the climate crisis. However, we're not going to be able to do this alone and with our own resources. And that's why we propose the need to implement immediately the framework of approaches not based on the markets, based in Article 6.8 of the Paris Agreement, to support with international cooperation and in a fair and equitable way the developing countries with their mitigation and adaptation processes to climate change. It's also important to make feasible the provision of financing for alternative methods of adaptation and mitigation for an integral approach and a sustainable one for the forests. Alternatives to payment for results, the agreement defined by Article 5 of the Paris Agreement. The Green Climate Fund should encompass the mandates of the COP and act urgently to offer financing for alternatives to REDD+. Bolivia has also proposed that the Cop26 comprehensively consider all of the topics related to adaptation to offer coherence and coordination to the matters of adaptation and to align these to the definition of the global goals. This is essential to effectively support the adaptation in developing countries. Lastly, I would like to point out that COP26 in Glasgow is the time to stop hypocrisy with Mother Earth and to demonstrate clearly that we have a real will among the developing countries to impede its imminent collapse. Wherever this will already exists, and this will already exist among us, the developing countries. Thank you very much.
The President of Bolivia very much indeed for his contribution. Thank you, sir. And I'd now like to welcome the President of Palau. And Mr. President Serangel-Witz, I know that you have travelled 5 days to get here, and in very difficult circumstances. I want to thank you for your efforts, and your contribution is warmly welcomed.
Thank you, Prime Minister Johnson, and thank you for the warm hospitality and that your country has shown. It is indeed great to be here, honorable dignitaries, to address you from a perspective of a large ocean state that is incredibly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. The IPCC reports tell the story of a planet in crisis, and I would hope that decades of research, sophisticated modeling would be sufficient to prompt swift action at this summit. However, let me personalize the data and explain that climate change is not a threat. It is the present reality. My country is being devastated by frequent typhoons, which we didn't have. Sea level rise is already encroaching in our homes, overrunning our docks, destroying our crops. And the weather events have threatened and destroyed our roads, our schools, and our homes. And in a cruel and never-ending cycle of codependence, we look to partnerships with the very nations whose emissions threaten our existence in order to survive the devastation that they are responsible for. With our few resources, Palau has created a national marine sanctuary and partnered with conservation experts for an adaptive management systems and conducted R&D for resilient local crops that can withstand saltwater inundation and partnered for renewable energy capacity. That is what true commitment looks like, And here at this World Leaders Summit, we demand it from all others. I know today we see some are not here, but it indeed requires all of us acting together. Mitigation and adaptation are essential components of our survival from this global crisis. Pacific small island developing states contribute a mere 0.3% of global emissions. Yet, studies show that 100 billion is needed annually just to cope. Climate financing must be equitably distributed, and large emitters must step up and deliver on their NDCs and financing. No more debate, no more excuses, no more blah, blah, blah. It's time to take action. Cop26 must be the final platform upon which we sign our fates. I spoke to the President of the Marshall Islands just before I came, who is unable to join us because of COVID. But his island is going under. They are climate refugees, and it is up to us to make sure that they survive. And it requires all of us acting together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and it's so important to hear that testimony. I'm really grateful to you. Can we go to the Secretary General of the United Nations to begin to wrap up? Then I'll go to Alok, and I'll briefly conclude, and we'll all move on. But Antonio, over to you.
I think this title is appropriated. Action and Solidarity, the Critical Decade. Because the most important act of solidarity, namely with the developing countries that are particularly vulnerable to climate change, is to guarantee that we do not go above 1.5 degrees. And to guarantee that we do not go above 1.5 degrees, this decade is essential. I, of course, follow with a lot of interest all the commitments about net zero in 2050 or 2060 or whatever. But the truth is, if the national determined contributions will not significantly improve in relation to emissions during this decade, we will not be able to reach 1.5 degrees. It will be irreversible to lose that possibility. But that creates a new kind of geography, because the geography in which all these things were thought was a geography in which there was developed countries that had essentially created the problem of climate change, and developing countries that were the victims of that, and then so there was a necessity of solidarity by developed countries providing developing countries with the resources necessary to mitigation, but especially to adaptation, because they were already suffering the impacts of climate change. But now we have three groups of countries. We have developed countries, we have least developed countries, and developing countries of relatively small dimension, and we have middle-income countries that are emerging economies and that are relevant from the point of view of emissions. And so the question of solidarity now is more complex. So it has a dimension with the least developed countries and the majority of the developing countries that do not contribute much to climate change. And there is what it is essential, the 100 billion to materialize, and to materialize seriously. Let's be honest, the proposal that is on the table is not entirely responding to what is needed. I mean, it needs to be clear and guaranteed, and not a postponement that eventually, according to OECD, we will be able to. I mean, I understand the frustration of developing countries, so we need to do one step further, and we need to mobilize international financial institutions for adaptation and mitigation, and we need to have 50-50 for adaptation, and we need, I mean, this is to do what was supposed to be done based on the Paris Agreement seriously in terms of financial solidarity in all its aspects. But then we have the third group of countries. And the problem is that this third group of countries have natural determined contributions in which the volume of emissions will not decrease, sometimes will even increase during the next decade. but have real difficulties in relation to their productive sectors, and namely in relation to their energy sector, extremely dependent on coal. Which means that we need to find here, naturally asking them to make the maximum effort, we need to find here mechanisms of support for them to be able to accelerate the transition, which means, in my opinion, coalitions of developed countries that have the technology and the financial capacity to, on a case-by-case basis, in which each one of these big emerging economies is able to have a reduction of emissions in the next decade compatible to keeping the 1.5, because if not, we will not get there. Of course, this means speaking seriously with China, speaking seriously with India, speaking seriously with Indonesia, with Turkey, and etc. But we cannot put it on a simple base to say now you need to do also the same reduction that we are doing, because we have to recognize that their economies are more complicated to do so, and that so we need to find here a strong technological and financial coalition to be able to make them really reduce emissions in order to keep the 1.5, because without 1.5 there is no solidarity. The victims will be, we know. I mean, you look at SIDS in Caribbean and in the Pacific. Look at African countries with drought that is decimating entire regions. Look at the Corredor Seco in Latin America. I mean, it is clear that these two different fronts need to be addressed. The front of the financial support to developing countries and least developed and other developing countries that are not key emitters, which is essentially what we have been discussing, the 100 billion, adaptation, etc. And then a partnership that is needed with those developing, middle-income, emerging economies that are today an element without which it will be impossible to preserve 1.5.
Thank you. I totally agree with all that. Alok.
Thank you, Prime Minister. So I think over the past year I've had the privilege to visit many of the countries that are represented around this table, and actually to talk to communities on the front line of climate change who frankly weren't responsible for causing the climate crisis. And I do think there is a moral, and actually I think, as the Prime Minister and others have said, there's also an economic case to act overwhelmingly. And I've been very struck by listening to all today about the commitment to action and the ambition and the support, the new support that is being offered from developed nations. And of course, all of that is really welcome. But I think we all have to recognize, very frankly, that there is still a big gap. There are still big global gaps that remain. And I do think that COP26 negotiations can help to fill some of those gaps, but it is only with the backing of leaders. Without that, this is not going to work. And so we're going to need these negotiations to deliver on finance, on adaptation, on keeping 1.5 within reach. And we also need to finalize the Paris rulebook. I mean, these are the outstanding issues that after 6 years, we have still not resolved. So I gathered some of your ministers in London in July, and then with Roberto, we had the pre-COP in Milan to try and make some of the progress that we need to see. And I can tell you there are some landing grounds that are emerging. But I mean, the reality is we're still not close enough. So what we need is the political will to deliver. And frankly, only you can inject that political can-do attitude. And I have to say, we agreed a really complex agenda yesterday at COP. And I think that shows to me that there is a political will to bring about agreement. So I have one simple ask of all the leaders here, and please pass this on to your leaders if they are not in the room now, is that please instruct the ministers and negotiators to come armed with a currency of compromise over the next 2 weeks. And please tell them that you expect Glasgow to deliver on the promises that world leaders made 6 years ago in Paris. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you all very much. Listen, this has been a brilliant session in which we've heard the horrific accounts of what is happening now in real time. Never mind our children, our great-grandchildren, the groups that we traditionally talk about. It's clear that this is moving so fast up the agenda of our our world, our electorates, because it's happening now. And that's why it was so good to hear from colleagues around the world, from Sheikh Hasina, from Mia, from Srangel in Palau. These are vivid testimonies of what is happening now. So look, I agree passionately with what Antonio has said about the need to form coalitions here at this COP to help the countries that rely on coal. The countries that are finding it very hard to make the rapid transition. We know who those countries are. I think Antonio has identified some of them. And Mario set out earlier on in his speech the ways that we could start to do that. We need to get on and do that here at this COP. Just one thought I have listening to you, Antonio. We shouldn't forget also that the countries that are worst hit, but that aren't themselves huge emitters, do also need programs to help them to green power generation. We should be thinking about that as well, and coalitions to help them. But look, it is incredibly urgent. What I took from this morning's the wonderful presentation by David Attenborough, funnily enough, although it was incredibly harrowing, it also, for me, held out the prospect that humanity could change this, and we could fix it within this generation. And there's a paradox there, of course, because the more we become convinced as human beings that we're capable of our own salvation, the more dangerous we are. And the greater the risk of complacency. So what we want to do is to be in a state of semi-permanent despair until we've actually fixed it. If you understand the logic of what I'm trying to say, it would be a huge mistake to indulge in any premature optimism. This is going to take a long time. It will take a huge amount of effort, and this COP is a real test of whether we've got the will to do it. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Vengo de uno de los 3 países más bellos de la Tierra. Allí hay una explosión de vida, miles de especies multicolores en los mares, en los cielos, en las tierras.
Te hablo a ti, que deseas acabar con la corrupción que nos hunde en la miseria. Tengan claro que mi lucha seguirá siendo implacable, como lo he hecho toda mi vida.
Ley de la República.
semejante lucha de los activistas?
Bueno, hemos firmado el tratado internacional que se convierte en ley de la República de Escazú,